Today we continue our Unsolved series looking back at some of Colorado's most notorious cold cases. Beth Miller was 14 years old when she left her house in Idaho Springs to go for a jog. It was August 16th, 1983. Tragically, she hasn't been seen since, despite a massive search and years of investigating by several law enforcement agencies. It has long been assumed that Beth was abducted and murdered, but nobody knows for sure because her body was never found.
Kept waiting for a phone call that, well, don't worry, we found her. Never got that, didn't get that call.
So that was Beth's sister there. She actually became a detective to try to get answers in her sister's case. Kevin Vaughan has covered this story extensively over the last several years. So this investigation really was considered kind of a botched investigation.
It was. There was a grand jury investigation some years later that found all kinds of problems with the way the investigation was handled in the beginning, and we have to realize that 40 years ago, law enforcement was not as sophisticated as it was now. This happened in Idaho Springs, which was a small community. A lot of times, you know, in the smaller communities, their law enforcement officers don't have experience with cases like this. There were a lot of problems with that initial case, yes.
Any suspects ever talked about?
There have been a handful of suspects that have been looked at hard over the years. Beth Miller's sister has a theory of which one of them is responsible for her disappearance and presumed death. That's a man who's no longer alive. His girlfriend told authorities that she helped him bury Beth Miller's body at one point. There are other investigators that have different suspects that they think are most likely culpable for this. So at this point, they're not, you know, there has not been a definitive conclusion by investigators that we think this is the person who did this.
But that person unfortunately never led anyone to her body. Is there any chance that her body will be found? I mean, 40 years later.
40 years later is a long time, and yet if we think about the case of Janelle Matthews in Greeley, kidnapped in 1985, and her remains were discovered in 2019, buried in Weld County in a shallow grave. So that was, you know, she was kidnapped just a couple years after Beth was taken, and that was just a few years ago that she was found. So there could still be hope. I mean, that the lack of her remains is a huge handicap in this investigation, because all they really know is that she disappeared from Idaho Springs while out jogging. Nobody knows where she was last seen, where she was taken, and without her body, they don't have anything really to go on. If they found her remains, they would have a starting point to try to figure out, like, who had access to that area, who might have been around there, those kinds of things. And of course, after 40 years, it's tough.
Yeah, and we talked about how DNA technology has come so far in those years, so you never know what you would find on that body. Last question for you, because we only have a few more seconds here. Was any evidence found? Because it seems to me like she just disappeared.
She just disappeared. The only evidence that they ever had were statements from people, witnesses that thought they saw her someplace, or in the case of this one suspect, girlfriend saying that she helped bury the body. They never had any hard physical evidence. No, you know, there wasn't surveillance cameras or anything like that.
And you can tell that it has rocked Beth's family. I mean, her sister became a detective because of it, and still holding out hope. Kevin, thank you so much for coming in. We're going to dive even deeper into this story coming up at 8:30 this morning. We'll be right back.